Welcome to your show, Identities Umhlobo, your show that talks about your social, economic, and political issues with your friend, Nyari Mombe. We've been moving along with talking about public finance management. And in the studio today, I'm joined by colleagues from ZimCode, which is bringing us this program. Madam, introduce yourself.
I'm Janet Shaw. Thank you, Nyari. It's good to be here.
Welcome.
Thank you. I am also Tafazo Chkumbo.
Thank you very much. Thank you, friends, for being here to discuss this important and pertinent issue. And I think we've had an opportunity here on Identities ZBC to talk about, to educate the nation about public finance management over the last 4 series. And this is over many series. I may actually have lost count. But we want to understand the link between debt and human rights. The public debt and human rights. But we want you to start by just maybe, Madam Janet, give us a recap to understand what debt is.
Okay, thank you very much, Nyari. When we are talking about debt, particularly public debt, this is the debt that the country borrows or guarantees on behalf of the citizens of Zimbabwe or on behalf of the nation for developmental purposes or to cover budget deficits in line with the provision either of social services or for infrastructure development. So what it means is that our government has got a mandate, if they see need, having evaluated what they have in the pot in terms of the domestic resources. So if there is a gap, they have a mandate, which is also in the Constitution, which is in our Public Finance Management Act, which is in our Public Debt Act, for them to borrow. And they can borrow on the local market, or they can borrow on the external market, which brings us to the issue of domestic debt and external debt. So when they borrow, it's to cover a certain gap, a developmental gap, or social gap, or infrastructure gap. And there are principles that we have spoken about in previous episodes around the principles that guide that borrowing. And there are oversight bodies that then also oversee that the borrowing is done in a legal and principled manner that at the end of the day benefits the citizens of the nation or of Zimbabwe. So when today it's good that we're going to get more into it, because they don't borrow just for the sake of borrowing. It is for the benefit of the citizens. There must be some benefit that is derived by the citizens, because at the end of the day they're borrowing on their behalf, and also it's the citizens that are going to pay for the debt, either through taxes, through levies, or whatever form of repayment that has to be done. The citizens are also involved and included in there.
Thank you very much. So we've just recapped on debt, the fundamentals of debt and what happens. We've understood that sometimes the government is borrowing locally or internationally in the domestic or foreign debt. Tafazo, would you like to quickly touch on where the government can borrow, just for example, locally and internationally as well? So Janet has given us the domestic, which is the local. Well, I think it's kind of like exciting for me to realize, oh, the government, because sometimes I think when we hear the issue of government debt, we're thinking, oh, it's international. What are some of the sources for the government to borrow locally and, yeah?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Nyari. Like what Janet just said, when the government is faced with a budget deficit, it simply has to borrow in order to cover that particular deficit. And there are both external sources and domestic sources where the government can borrow. And in terms of domestically, the provisions of borrowing are normally under the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. So this is where the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe issues treasury bills, where the financial institutions, the insurance companies and the banks, they buy the treasury bills, where the government will then have to borrow through the issuance of those treasury bills, which matures after a period of time. That's why you have a 91-day treasury bill, a 30-day treasury bill.
So are you saying when they're borrowing from the Reserve Bank, where is the Reserve Bank, those treasury bills, where is the source of that financing?
Okay, so...
Because we understand the Reserve Bank is also the government, right?
Okay, sure.
So how does the government borrow from itself?
No, it doesn't borrow from itself. It's actually the Reserve Bank which borrows on behalf of the government.
Okay,
so
from
it issues treasury bills
Mhm.
to banks and other financial institutions like insurance companies.
Right.
So the insurance companies buys the treasury bills. So by buying the treasury bills, that's when the government gets that money. So the government uses the money throughout the year, and after a given period of time, say 91 days or 6 months or a year, that's when the government has to repay that particular amount. And in that case, it's either the government can allow the 31 days, and if, like in this current situation, where our domestic debt is so high, it can actually restructure that domestic debt so that it is paid over a month.
I do understand. I don't want us to spend so much time on this because I know we covered the issue earlier, but I want you to then just before we go on the break, to just introduce us to say, how does the issues of debt affect the issues of human rights? Maybe just introduce us. We will come back and talk deeper into it, but introduce us to human rights and debt. What is the relationship?
Okay. I think
Janet, you can also chime in if you want.
Yeah, like what Janet has said, this is money that is coming in as we are borrowing to finance social and economic development. And in that sense, if that money has been borrowed according to the law, and if that money is going to be used in line with our constitution and the law, then the borrowed funds are going to help in terms of realization of the social and economic rights of citizens. And we also find a situation where then there's a negative relationship between debt and the realization of
Can you start with the positive? Do we have the positive?
Yes, the positive.
Okay.
Yeah, so in this case, we are saying the government has a mandate to realize the Chapter 4 human rights that are there in our constitution. So which rights include the right to education, right to health, right to safe drinking water, and so on and so forth. So when you borrow that money, it means you are going to use that particular resource to ensure that people have access to healthcare, people have access to education, people have access to clean and potable water.
Right.
Yeah. So then the negative will only come out when, for example, the city of Harare borrows money, and then it is going to pay salaries and packages for their workers. And then the state is now faced with the responsibility to repay that particular amount. It means an amount that we are supposed to borrow and probably provide more services to the people. We are now borrowing that money again to repay, or maybe you are taking the resources that we are supposed to provide services, and then you are now using that to repay that particular debt.
Okay. I just wanted to come in.
I will come back to you when we come back from the break.
Okay.
I also just want to then follow up to say, maybe this was just an example of using city of Harare.
Of course.
Not necessarily that they actually the government, because there's a difference between the government and the council, right? Maybe you explain
We will
that
talk about
when
it in the context of debt, because the government can guarantee
For
a
the city
local
council.
government,
fantastic.
yes, so they are publicly guaranteed debts. So this will be your parastatals, your local authorities, they can actually be guaranteed by the government. So it's, well, in the end.
We'll come back and talk about that.
Yes.
We're just going to take a quick break. Do not go away on Identities Umhlobo.